brought to you by the Plant Virginia Natives Marketing Partnership, a collaborative and statewide initiative to increase the use and drive an increase in the availability of the beautiful variety of plants native to Virginia for their numerous ecological, economic, and aesthetic benefits. The Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program initiated and has been coordinating the partnership through grants from NOAA since the first regional marketing campaign on Virginia's Eastern Shore was launched over a decade ago. Plant Virginia Natives now engages and connects hundreds of local, regional, and state partners across the state. I want to call out a few for their role in making tonight's webinar possible. Our Zoom host, Blue Ridge Prism, especially Beth Mizell, and Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, especially Phyllis Laslett and Megan Compton, who handled registration for our 2,631 and plus audience. Our facilitator tonight is Joanne Hutton with the Plant Nova Natives campaign, and she's also a master gardener and a master naturalist in the Northern Virginia region. And helping Trista, our speaker tonight, respond to as many of your questions as is possible will be Lisa Hamilton with the Richmond Audubon Society, Nicole Hirsch with the New River Valley Regional Commission, and the new Southwest Virginia Natives campaign that'll be kicking off this year, and also Stacy Moulds with the Virginia Department of Transportation's Pollinator Habitat Program and the Plant RVA Natives campaign, and Emily Byers, who is with the Virginia Native Plant Society Jefferson chapter in the Shenandoah area. And thanks to also to the many Virginia Native Plant partners who helped plan this event. And finally, thank you to our audience. So there's a little housekeeping we need to keep in mind. And so I'm going to turn this overview over to Beth.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Virginia. And so we're all pretty seasoned with Zoom, but some of you may be new to the interface. So just a few housekeeping tips for this evening. I just disabled the chat because we would like for you all to direct all of your questions to the Q&A box. And please feel free to send questions during this evening's presentation, and then and send your questions afterwards too. So we'll be answering questions throughout, and then after the presentation, we will ask questions of this evening's speaker. The raised hand function is enabled for this webinar, but we ask that you please not use it. We will not be responding to raised hands, and again, direct all of your questions to the Q&A box. And if you can't find the Q&A box, hover your cursor at the bottom of the Zoom window and it'll pop up and you can click on that to open. And just a reminder that we have a large audience this evening and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. So we thank you for your patience. And again, direct all your questions to the Q&A box. And let me see. And I just also want to remind you that this is a Zoom webinar and you can see us, but we can't see you. So your audio and your video are disabled. So again, send your questions to the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them. So with that, I'll turn this back over to Virginia. Thank you.
Well, I will take the lead here. Good evening. I think Virginia was about to introduce me, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Joanne Hutton, and as she mentioned, I'm a master gardener, master naturalist who's been involved with the Plant Nova for Northern Virginia Natives campaign here in the Northern Virginia area. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to introduce our wonderful speaker this evening, Trista Imrich. owner of Wild Works of Whimsy. She is a Virginia certified horticulturalist, a designer who is VSLD certified, and a level 2 Chesapeake Bay landscape professional in design and installation. A Navy veteran surface warfare officer. This Ohio native has a Master's of Science in Environmental Policy and Management, bringing a unique perspective to the art of landscape design. Trista is actively involved with the Lynn Haven River Now, a Virginia Beach watershed nonprofit where she worked for 6 years, and she helped to write and edit the Native Plants for Southeast Virginia Guide. Her design work focuses on conservation landscaping and stormwater management, utilizing a palette of native plants. And so without further ado, I turn the mic and the screen over to you, Trista. And thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Thanks, Joanne. All right, let me get my screen going here. All right, is that working, hopefully? All right, so welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here. And as you heard from the introduction there, I don't know if there really is a traditional background for this industry. I love to hear people's stories of how they got here, but I certainly do not have an ecology background or even a traditional horticultural degree. So hopefully my hope is that that makes the information I'm bringing you a little more relatable. And I hope that you are all able to get something out of this. So tonight we are going to talk about designing with layers. All right, so first we'll talk about what the heck are layers within landscaping. And we'll talk about what plants you can use. And a disclaimer, there are over 20,000 native plants in the US. I don't know how many of those are in Virginia, but a lot more than I have time to cover tonight. So we'll talk about a few, and I know all the other speakers are also covering some. So yeah, we'll talk about what we can. How can you find your plant community? More importantly, since we cannot cover everything tonight, and how can you use those plants within your garden? All right, so what are layers? This is kind of what we all grow up in school, or at least I did, learning about what layers are within vegetation. And so while this is useful, it's not really as relevant to talking about layers within our own local landscape. So for our purposes tonight, at least, because even these, I'm sure it can be debated and argued what exactly our vegetative layers are. These are the layers that we're going to discuss this evening. So we're going to talk about the canopy layer, the understory, the shrub herbaceous layer, herbaceous perennials, and ground covers. And I put these into a pyramid shape because generally the things that are at the top, though certainly they have a lot of vegetative mass. Generally, you know, we're only going to have maybe a few trees relative to a larger number of shrubs and a larger number of perennials and ground cover. Those are going to kind of be what make up the bulk of our biodiversity and massive plants, just because of space that we have, basically. And if we don't fill all of these layers, they will be filled by nature, which means maybe invasives or weeds. So we're going to talk about how to get these filled. And we're also going to talk about not just using those vegetative vertical layers, but also mixing deciduous and evergreen plants, varying our texture in the vegetation, and varying the bloom time. And the Xerces Society actually, which focuses on invertebrate Conservation actually recommends 12 to 20 species of flowering plants with at least 3 blooming at a time from May through August. So really thinking about what do you have blooming when? And all of these things are not only great for our critters and providing habitat, but they also make your landscape more interesting. And so, you know, it's good for them and it's good for us in our gardens. So all animals, including ourselves, need to have spaces for food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young. And it's typically going to take more than a lawn, turf grass, a tree, and a few foundation shrubs to provide all of these things. So a really popular thing now is creating something like a butterfly garden, right? So we think we're building habitat, planting something like this, because we see butterflies, right? So, but even if this invasive plant, this is a lantana, and hopefully I'm not gonna be arguing people about what's invasive or not this evening. This is considered invasive. Even if it were providing pollinators with sufficient food source, they still are gonna need somewhere that they can go to lay their eggs, to get access to water, minerals, nutrients, and they're still gonna need somewhere for cover. So we still need to provide them other layers and other things within the landscape, not just the pretty flowering plants. So just quickly, I wanted to touch on it. Theoretically, plants would go through successional growth, where you'd have a disturbance, things maybe start with small pioneer species, things that grow and fill in quickly. And then if left undisturbed, so if you don't have weeding, mowing, fire, a tree falling into an area and creating a clearing, then they would progress into a mature forest. We are altering our succession within our own gardens, right? Because we may want to keep a wildflower meadow aesthetic. And maybe we manage that by mowing or on a smaller scale by weeding. And, you know, certainly we can't offer everything to wildlife within our relatively small spaces, but we can offer really varied habitat and layers that provide both visual interest and are giving the animals good use and habitat. So within that layered garden, we're offering them what we can, but we're still probably going to be keeping our gardens in kind of a state of stasis, keeping the flowering things that we like around, etc. We don't all necessarily want just forests in our yards. All right, so what are some plants that we can use? And again, I'm just going to go over a couple recommendations. Most of these have relatively widespread distribution within the state of Virginia. And I'm going to try to talk about ones that especially have high value for high habitat value. And of course, good aesthetic value as well. And just FYI in the background here, this is our native Virginia creeper. And it has gorgeous fall color and can make a really nice deciduous ground cover as well, though it does have a tendency to climb. All right, so first though, we're going to talk about tree canopy. So when you're talking about, you know, that's basically what you're seeing here, right? All these tall trees that you see from above. So you do generally want a mix of evergreen and deciduous. A lot of our tree canopies may be made up of things like oaks, hickories, tulip poplars, pines. And unfortunately, when I go see clients, a lot of times the first thing that people want to do is take out their trees. And, you know, they want more sun on their property, or it's too close to the house and they're afraid it's going to fall. And so, you know, of course, trees provide incredible habitat to all kinds of critters, and they add value to your landscaping. So I'm sure all of you are eager to plant more trees, so I won't belabor that. But start with the white oak, and hopefully all of you guys saw Doug Tallamy's presentation, and he certainly mentions oaks, because these guys are caterpillar powerhouses. They have more caterpillars as far as hosting than any other plant that we know of anyway. So white oak is pretty much throughout all of Virginia, and these get 50 to 80 feet. So a tall canopy tree. Relatively insignificant bloom to us anyway. And like a lot of canopy trees, they do prefer full sun, dry to medium conditions. And again, they, in my area at least, they will host 513 species of caterpillar. And if you don't have it already, once we get through these, I have a slide that will show you where you can go and find how many moth and butterfly species are using your plants as host in your specific area for your zip code as well. Oh, and so these guys are, they're long-lived, they're slow growing, right? As opposed to the river birch, which is also, 40 to 70 foot tree, but is a faster growing tree, a little shorter lived than an oak as well. So these guys have these fun little catkin flowers over on the left here. And these will actually take a little bit of shade. They do prefer wet conditions, but they just have a really nice bark to them, a pretty structure, and they are host to 321 caterpillar species. The Pignut Hickory, a little bit of a different one. This is about the same size height-wise as the oak, with a bloom time April to May. And full sun also tolerates a little bit of shade though, medium water, and 239 caterpillar species. And this one's also got a nice fall color. Understory trees. So these are great to have as kind of that transition between your tall canopy trees and your shrub layer and into your herbaceous perennials. So as things are coming and going from the taller trees, it's nice for them to have this layer where they can kind of perch, look for the food that they want, and still have some cover before they go into those ground covers and the shorter things where maybe they're a little more exposed. So some of these have a little bit of crossover with shrubs. It depends on who you talk to. But again, they're kind of that transition. A lot of them tend to be spring blooming because they are under the canopy. And so they tend to be more shade tolerant than the canopy trees because they're used to living down there. And this photo here on the upper left is the native fringe tree. There is also an Asian one, so this is the native one. And I'll talk more about most of these in a minute. The top right is our redbud. The bottom right is the pagoda dogwood, and the bottom left is sweet bay magnolia. All right, so I'm going to start with Serviceberry, and I love this tree. I like it for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is just its multi-season interest. So as you can see here on the left, it gets just covered in these wonderful white flowers in the spring. It has this really pretty fall color, and best of all, it has these amazing berries that I think are 1,000,000 times better than blueberries. And so if you can beat the birds to these, they are amazing. So I highly, highly recommend having some of these around. This one gets approximately 15 to 25 feet, and it's a spring bloomer with a white bloom, full sun to shade, so very versatile. If it is in sun, it would want a little bit more water and moisture, but moist to dry conditions. This one is host to 100 species of moth and butterfly, and also attractive to native bees. The French tree, again, this is the native one, about the same size as that's Serviceberry. Another spring bloomer, and it's got these really fun white tassel-y blooms on it that you see on the right side there, and also great fall color. This one is also full sun to shade, so, and moist to dry. These are very versatile. This one is used a lot within rain gardens as well, so it really will tolerate quite a bit of water. This one is host to 12 species of butterfly and moth, and also attracts native bees. And this is my last understory guy, the American snowbell. Again, there is a Japanese snowbell. So you do want to be careful, get the American snowbell if you're looking for the native. This one is a fairly small tree, and I'm sure some would consider this to be more of a large shrub, but 6 to 10 feet with a spring bloom, this pretty little bell-shaped bloom over here. And full sun to part shade, medium to wet conditions. This one is host to 2 pollinator species, but also attracted to bees, butterflies, and birds. As you go from that understory into the next layer, we've got shrubs. And this, again, is just another important transition area. It provides a lot of cover and also food. A lot of these have berries or seed heads, and also are host plants. And you do want to have a good mix of evergreen and deciduous in this layer as well. In the photos over here, the upper left is an oak leaf hydrangea. We've got a Carolina allspice going clockwise, Spicebush. My Spicebush right now is in full bloom and looks gorgeous. And the Winterberry. So the first one I wanted to talk about is one that I just think is fun. It honestly doesn't look like much when it's not blooming, but these flowers are just really fun. So buttonbush is a fairly large shrub, 5 to 12 feet. And it does have a summer white bloom, full sun to part shade, and medium to wet conditions. I often see this one growing along rivers and streams and things like that. This one is host to 25 butterfly and moth species. And all right, so I included a cultivar down here, and I know there's been some discussion from the other speakers about cultivars. And the one time that I do sometimes use cultivars is when they have changed the plant to make it more compact and smaller, but still kept the same foliage coloration, still keeping the same structure and coloration on the flower, but just making it smaller and more compact so it can fit in a lot of my client gardens a little better. So, because not everybody has room for a 5 to 12 foot shrub. So there is a smaller 3 to 4 foot sugar shack shrub for the buttonbush. And so I did want to mention that because it is such a great host plant. And I guess I should mention too, in case you did misdug things, when I say host plant, I mean a plant that is feeding caterpillars specifically of those butterfly and moth species. So it's something that the caterpillars need to eat in order to develop into a moth or butterfly. American Beautyberry. So this is another really fun multi-season interest one. This one is 3 to 6 feet. You can cut this back pretty hard and it will grow right back and flower and produce berries again still in the same year if you want to keep it on the smaller side. This one is a summer bloomer with these little lavendery pink flowers over here. And then it gets these gorgeous purple berries. And so this one, it is clay tolerant, and it is host to just 2 butterfly and moth species in my area, but it's got these great berries for wildlife, attracts birds and pollinators. The Inkberry, this is a great evergreen shrub. And the species of this is 5 to 8 feet. And it gets little white flowers in the spring. And those are a really great source for our native bees. This one will do full sun to part shade, though it really is fairly shade tolerant, and medium to wet conditions. These do need a male and a female for berries, a lot like a lot of our hollies. And this one is host to, well, the hollies are host to 46 butterfly and moth species and attract bees and birds. And I did also include, there are a whole plethora of other cultivars for this one that are more dwarf, because this one does have a tendency to sucker. And so some of the cultivars help to kind of keep it a little more manageable. Virginia Sweetspire. This one is not as widely dispersed, but it is one of my favorites. This one, the species is 3 to 5 feet, and it's got these gorgeous summer white blooms that just cover it. Full sun to part shade, medium to wet soils. And again, it's got this really nice fall color as well. This one will tolerate heavy shade, erosion, clay soil, and wet soil. It is host to the Anguilline prominent and also attracts bees and butterflies. And this one's also got some smaller dwarf cultivars that I've listed down there that are common. And again, this one will sucker quite a bit, which means it's sending up shoots all around it. And that's how it grows and expands. And so it can get a little out of hand if you do have a species one, which is why, again, some of the cultivars keep a little more manageable and compact. Mountain laurel. This is a really gorgeous shrub if you come across it when it's blooming in the spring. And this is another evergreen one, or at least where we are it is. It gets these rose to white flowers. It just gets covered with. This one likes to have part shade, medium water, and it's host to 26 butterfly and moth species. Spicebush, again, this is the one that I said is blooming in my yard right now. This one is 6 to 12 feet and blooming away. This is full sun to part shade. They do not get as many flowers in the shade. Medium water, host of 13 moth and butterfly species, including this cute guy over here on the right. That is the Spicebush swallowtail. And this one attracts birds, but you do need a male and female for berries on this one as well. Herbaceous perennials. So I call this the fun layer because this is the layer where you can really go nuts and add all that color and texture. And you're really bringing in a lot of seeds, pollen, nectar. I do include grasses and ferns in this layer as well. And over here, got some summer phlox. In the upper left, some rudbeckia, some Joe Pye weed. The bottom right, that bright one is the monarda. Bottom left, we've got some liatrice or blazing star. The upper right, I'm honestly not sure what it is, but it does show the, I think it was a stock photo. It does show the diversity that you can still have some winter interest with a lot of these things. You know, people say, oh, they just die back and there's nothing there. But if you leave those seed heads intact, they really can be kind of pretty. All right, so the first one is Columbine. This one is 2 to 3 feet, and it is a spring bloomer, pink to red and yellow. This one, they say it blooms around the same time as the hummingbirds are coming back up through. And there are a lot of cultivars and crazy different colors of this as well. This is what the native one looks like. This one will do full sun to part shade, medium water, and it is host to 11 caterpillars It also attracts hummingbirds, bees, butterflies, and hawk moths, which are like those clear wing moths and hummingbird moths, cool things. Butterflyweed. So this is an Asclepias. And so this is one that is a host for the monarchs. And I find that it's one of the more well-behaved ones. And so it's a smaller size and it doesn't spread quite as aggressively as some of the other milkweed species. And so this one is only 1 to 2.5 feet. It is a summer bloomer and it does like full sun, dry to medium conditions. And it's actually host to 12 different pollinator species. So not just the monarch, which everybody thinks of. This upper left photo is the seed heads. Pennsylvania sedge. There are so many sedges in cultivation right now that you can find for sale, which is fantastic because sedges are a wonderful, wonderful, I mean, really they're a ground cover too. And they tend to be, a lot of them are evergreen. And so they can make up kind of a great no-mow option as a lawn replacement. And so this one specifically is pretty abundant throughout Virginia. This one gets 1/2 foot to 1 foot tall. And then a lot of times it tends to just kind of flop over like you see in the upper right photo. This one enjoys dry shade, which is a spot that a lot of times people complain about being able to find a plant for. So this is a great plant for that spot. And again, it's evergreen, so for year-round coverage. And this is very tolerant of heavy shade and wet soil, though it would like that wet soil to be well drained. And it can host 36 moth and butterfly species. Though I wasn't able to find out exactly how many for here. Sneezeweed. This one doesn't sound very nice necessarily, but it is a great plant and has a fun kind of shape too. This one has a wide range in height, 1.5 to 5 feet. And this is a later bloomer, so August to October. This one is, it's good for your late pollinators and particularly the monarchs as they're coming back migrating. This is full sun, medium to wet conditions. And this one is very tolerant of deer, clay, and wet soil. It is host to 6 butterfly and moth species and also attracts bees and butterflies. Blazing star. This one is kind of fun to have in the landscape. It's a sort of a punctuation mark in a different kind of shape, 2 to 4 feet tall. And this one is a late summer bloomer. Full sun, medium water, and this is host to 4 butterfly and moth species. Attracts birds, hummingbirds, bees, butterflies. Spotted bee balm. We do have several different bee balm species too. I like this one because I see it in one of our local natural areas, and every time I look at it, it's just got all these little bee butts sticking out of it, which are fantastic. And they make me happy. So this one, its height is 1.5 to 2 feet. So it's also kind of one of the smaller bee balms, which is nice because some of them can get really leggy. This one blooms June to July, and it's got these really fun colors with these little polka dots kind of on it. This one is full sun to part shade, dry to medium, and hosts to 12 butterfly and moth species. Royal fern. I wanted to throw a fern in there because I love ferns. This one is 2 to 3 feet and part shade to full shade, medium to wet conditions. So fairly typical for ferns. This one is host to 7 butterfly and moth species. The blue wood aster. This one, again, several different species of asters are native, but this one is a little bit of a smaller one, 2 to 5 feet. Again, this one, the asters tend to bloom later in the summer into the fall. So also another good late pollinator species. Pale blue to rich blue and full sun to part shade. Because this is a wood aster, this one will actually tolerate quite a bit more shade than a lot of the other asters. Dry to medium conditions, and this one is host to 12 butterfly and moth species. Pink muhlygrass. I think this one is fun with those pink plumes that pop up. And this is another kind of late season one. So this one is 2 to 3 feet and blooms September to November. So I think that center photo, I don't know if you can make out what all of those are, but down here, it blooms around the same time as some of our goldenrod and saltbush. And so they really kind of make a nice composition together. Full sun to part shade, dry to medium conditions. And this one is host to 3 butterflies and moths, also tolerant to drought and black walnut. Little blue stem. This one has some different seasonal interest. It has this fun kind of bluish coloration in the spring, and this more kind of reddish copper hue in the fall. It's a nice compact one, 2 to 4 feet. Full sun, dry to medium conditions. And this one is deer, drought, erosion, dry soil, and black walnut tolerant. And it's also host to 7 skipper species. And in case you're not familiar with skippers, they're kind of an intermediate pollinator between butterflies and moths, and they're named for their really erratic flight. All right, so ground covers. This is kind of, I feel like, the most neglected part of the garden and the most neglected layer, because everyone likes to just come in, dump a load of wood mulch and call it a day, except not really, because you're gonna have to do that again the next year and the next year. And it's not really the most sustainable thing to use. So ground covers, live green ground covers, are great because they are a more sustainable option, and they will act as a green mulch. So they're gonna reduce your need to reapply every year. They're gonna hold your moisture in the soil. They're gonna reduce the weed pressure. They're gonna do everything for you that another type of mulch would do. But they're also providing cover for ground nesting critters and critters that live on the ground. So all these guys listed here. And I think they're a lot nicer to look at than mulch. So over here, we've got, from the upper left is green and gold, heuchera, penstemon, wild strawberry, Lindhaven carpet flower, and foam flower. And we'll talk about a few of those. But yeah, evergreen ground covers especially, I think, are amazing because they really help to keep out some of the weeds and other things, especially a lot of the invasive things. All right, so green and gold, I especially like this one because it is a really nice low one. It's 1/2 foot to 1 foot. It's evergreen. And from spring to fall, it has these adorable little yellow flowers. So I don't know what else you want in a ground cover. It's got multi-season interest. It's pretty tough. Once it's established, it can definitely tolerate a little bit of foot traffic. And it is a part shade to full shade, medium to wet plant. And it will tolerate very heavy shade as well. Wild strawberry, this is another evergreen plant. It does have an edible berry on it that is pretty good. You can see over on the right, it does have a white flower. A lot of times I have homeowners who tell me, oh no, I already have wild strawberries. They're growing all over my lawn. And I say, no, that's not the same strawberry. The plant itself actually looks a lot like the strawberry plant that you would plant. for fruit in your garden. So it is 1/4 foot tall to 3/4 foot tall. It does spread fairly well. It spreads the same way as any other strawberry plant would. It's got those white flowers, edible berry, and this one is full sun to shade, medium water, and it is deer, drought, and erosion tolerant. This one is host to 3 butterfly and moth species and attracts small native bees. And I have found that this one too, with those strawberries and that fruit, is kind of a magnet for, like, in my yard, box turtles. So this is kind of a fun one to have. That picture on the left, it does also have some native Carolina petunia in it, but the ground cover in there is the strawberry. And every year we have a box turtle family that lay their eggs in there. And so we find them in there a lot. It's a lot of fun. Coral bells. This is another great evergreen plant. This one is another low one, 1 to 2 feet. It does bloom in the summer. There are a lot of non-native coral bells that are, again, all kinds of crazy colors, sizes, huge flowers. This one doesn't have as showy a flower, but I think that the coloration on the foliage of this plant is pretty amazing. So I don't see any problem with the native one. It is a little smaller though, and maybe a little more slow growing. This one is full sun to part shade, medium water. It's very drought tolerant once established and attracts small native bees. The foam flower is 3/4 foot to a foot. Another spring bloomer, and it colonizes really nicely. See up in the upper left photo, and they just get covered in these flowers. Part shade to full shade, medium moisture, rabbit and deer tolerant. Small native bees are attracted to these little white flowers. All right, so this is that site that I mentioned earlier. If you do want to find which plants and which pollinators are native in your specific zip code. So you can go here, you can enter in your location information, and you can set up an account and even keep track of what you have. And so that's a great resource for you. And this is based on Doug Tallamy's research. All right, so just like we have all those layers above ground vertically, we've also got layers going on underneath the ground. So they have, the plants have different root and vascular systems, and obviously those can be a little difficult for us to observe. So I think that that is one of the reasons why it is really important for us to know what specific local plant communities are for our area, because we don't know, how all of these things are growing together and have learned to adapt. All these plants have developed to perform specific functions within their ecosystem and to fill unique niches. So they might be determined by their form and how they knit together. So great. So how do we know what those plant communities are and what's going to work for me? So do you want to talk about those plant communities? This is a basic definition. It's just a collection of plant species within a designated geographic unit. They tend to form a somewhat uniform patch that's different from other patches. And those can be influenced by soil, topography, climate, and human disturbance, amongst other things. And this is just a photo from the Shenandoah Valley. All right, so this is something that I would love for all of my Virginia folks out there to get familiar with. It can be a little intimidating, and so that's why I want to try to walk you through how I use this, and hopefully you will find it useful. But this resource, and this was included in the handout that went out to everyone earlier today in the email that you received. But this is the Natural Communities of Virginia classification of ecological groups and community types. So this breaks down 5 different systems into 14 ecological classes, into 82 ecological groups, and 308 community types. Yeah, 308 community types. So unfortunately, that means that I cannot tell all of you, even within Virginia, what plant community is going to work for your property necessarily. But I can help you find the resources to pull it together. So this is the website here. And this is what it looks like. So where do we start? All right, so these are those systems. We've got the terrestrial systems, the palustrine systems, the estuarine systems, the riverine system, and the marine systems. So these photos and information are from that site, but if some of these look familiar to you, then maybe it is something like what you have in your area. But terrestrial systems generally are just going to be your upland systems. So if you are not around water, then there is a good chance you may be in a terrestrial system. And this lists some of those. I'm not going to go through all of those now. Palustrine systems are just generally your non-tidal wetlands. And so again, there are some photos of what some of those may look like. And just quickly, if you're wondering over here what alluvial means, because I was, that's just alluvial is loose soil or sediment that's been eroded and redeposited. So typically like silt, clay, sand, or gravel that's just been picked up from somewhere and dropped off somewhere else. Estuarine systems are tidal wetlands. So a lot of these here where I'm at, basically anywhere that water is rising and lowering at a regular periodicity, it's gonna be a tidal wetland. Riverine systems are freshwater river channels. So if you live by a freshwater river, you may be in a riverine system. Marine systems, just ocean shores and flats. Okay, great. But which one is yours? So step number 1 to figuring out what your plant community is trying to identify some of the plants that are around you, particularly common ones. And like I said over here, not the crepe myrtles, which at least I know here are everywhere and people think they're native all the time because it's all they see, but the ones that are really abundant in your natural areas and in areas that are not disturbed necessarily. And so I did post over here on the left, again at DCR, they do have a state listing of the state natural areas. And so if you are lucky enough to be near one of those, they are a great resource to go and check out what plant communities are there, and just go and observe, and maybe run across things that are invasive, maybe not, maybe you see a bunch of natives, but just start figuring out what the heck the plants are. And there are generally also like I know we have city natural areas as well, and so if you don't have a state one nearby, you may want to look for a more of a city natural area, or just again trying to find somewhere that's more or less undisturbed, a park. And then ID your plants. So again, look around, see what seems to be abundant, and just start trying to figure out what the heck they are. So I 100% recommend the iNaturalist app if you do not have it yet. This is a fantastic app. That's the second one over, kind of, and then yeah, the right 3 photos are from the iNaturalist app. So this is available on iPhones and Androids, but you basically take a photo of something, upload it, click that "What did you see?" button on there, and it will give you suggestions. So took a photo of this spiderwort up at the top, and it gives you this whole list of suggestions of what the plant is, and it is amazingly accurate. And this app doesn't just work on plants, it also works on insects, it works on birds, it works on all sorts of things. So it is a wonderful app to have. Highly, highly recommend it. If you don't know exactly if you got the right thing, then once you submit it, it also goes out into like your local community of people, and they can look at it, and somebody who knows more than you do can say, yes, this looks right, or I don't know, maybe it's this, and they'll make that suggestion. So a wonderful, wonderful resource. Highly, highly recommend using it. Another great resource is the Flora of Virginia. On the far left there's an app. There's also a very large book, probably not useful to taking out with you, but the app does have a graphic key and dichotomous keys. So as you put in different aspects of the plant, like what the bloom color is, whether it's blooming or not, if it's evergreen, and whatever you know, then it starts to narrow down those plants that it could be. Other wonderful ways of IDing your plants are just plant guides, your regional plant guides, talking to your local extension office if you can't figure out what those plants are, and there's the link for that. And of course, your local master gardeners. So once you've got an idea of what some of those really common plants near you are, then what I do is go back to that site, and at the bottom, there's a PDF that you can open up with the natural community classification. And so Control F and start searching for that plant. And if you don't find one, then look for another one until you come up with something that seems like it could be. So for instance, we have a lot of live oaks here. So I came up with the Maritime Dune Scrub. It's got live oaks, and then it mentions some wax myrtle as well, which we also have. So that seems like a good starting point. I go back into that Maritime Zone community on the website, click on the Maritime Dune Scrub, and it takes me into this other page where I can click, and it's got all these photos of the communities. And so I can look and see, like, oh, does this look right? Does this look like what's around here? And if so, then great. And if you're not sure, look, you can go back, and they also have a map, and it's got little dots all over it where there are communities that they have gone in, and that's where these photos and things are from. And so I can say, yeah, well, I'm right next to one of those, so that makes sense. And then this is where, stay with me just for another minute. You can download a spreadsheet of compositional summary statistics at the bottom. And this looks a little terrifying, I'm not going to lie, but it is just a listing of all the plants that were found in that area. So these are the plants in that community. So what I do with these is I go through and I highlight the ones that I know that I can find in nurseries and that I can purchase, because that's important. If I can't find it anywhere, I can't get it, I can't do anything with that plant. So you can find those things by, I would look at your regional native plant guide, and the things that are in there are supposed to be things that are hopefully available. And if you can get inventory lists from your local nurseries, those are a wonderful resource as well. And I will also give you some additional plant resources later. All right, so these are those plants. So, I dive a little deeper, look at the photos, look at the information about those plants. So this is everything that I highlighted. So you can see in the top row, we've got a whole bunch of trees. We've got a couple shrubs over on the left there, some vines on the right, and then some grasses, some flowering things. And then, if I'm doing an average, normal, like residential garden, probably not going to put all these things in, especially if it's not a forest, because that's a lot of trees. So I'm going to take that list and just narrow it down and set my final plant community palette for my garden. And so I've got a live oak. That's kind of where I started with all of this. An evergreen tree, the wax myrtle, another evergreen, and then a whole bunch of herbaceous perennials and some grass. So again, this is kind of the reference community. I don't necessarily want to put this in a front yard. The neighbors might not be very happy about that. So maybe take those plants and put them together. And again, taking a lot of the flowering things. And maybe instead I end up with something like this. And I'm not saying that this is a pinnacle of garden design or anything here, but just to give you an idea of, you know, something that maybe you would put together as your plant community. And then over time, you know, things are going to kind of shift around, they're going to grow. And I would encourage you, as your garden grows and matures, to embrace change and not try to keep it in a state of stasis so much, but understand that it's going to change and adapt. And I'm starting to go kind of long, so I'm going to go through these quickly, sorry. Design hacks. All right, so groupings. When you're using a lot of layered plant material, make sure that you if you bring groupings in, it can help to bring some cohesion to your design. So drifts, groupings, put things in odd numbers. If you have larger plants, shrubs, and trees, that's going to help just make it look aesthetically nicer. Reduce your overall palette. So reduce maybe the number of colors that you have in your garden, and that's going to make it maybe not look quite as chaotic to other people. Arrange things in size order when you can. So your larger plants, your evergreen plants, you typically want to kind of keep to the back and use them for screening. And then, you know, your larger deciduous things would be next, and then kind of mix in smaller, different heights and textures. You don't want it to necessarily be a stair-stepped garden of tallest to shortest, you know, kind of mix things up a little bit. But kind of keep that idea in mind. Obviously, if you have a bed that you're going to be looking at from multiple angles, like a round bed, then you want to, the same would go for the other side, so that you're not blocking everything. As far as spacing, I know when you're using a lot of plants, it can be easy to get intimidated by quantity. So certainly do some research as to what the mature size of your plant is. And I would recommend just grabbing some graph paper, figure out a scale. So like 1 block equals a foot, and draw it out. You want to have some overlap at their mature size generally to kind of knit it all together. These are just a couple examples of how I design, and you can tell it's a lot of plants and everything is overlapping and touching, and that freaks people out sometimes, but it looks natural when it's growing, and these guys aren't going to have to mulch long term. Just to show you quickly what I was talking about as far as overlapping the plants. So this would be an example of a 2-foot plant that's got like a 6-inch overlap, and they're staggered. So that's going to help with your air circulation and also just make it look a little more interesting. All right, so quickly, again, just some examples here. This is what I see with a lot of my clients and sites. There's a canopy and not much else going on. So boom, we add in, we've got understory trees, we've got shrubs, and a bazillion ground cover and herbaceous perennials. And the homeowner of this one is actually working on planting this one right now. Here, kind of the same thing. So we've got trees, and a lot of the other stuff has just kind of been weeded out over time. You know, they wanted to keep a line to the door and didn't really know what else to put in there. So brought in a few shrubs, a lot of herbaceous perennials, but just a lot more interest. Here's the same thing. We've got compaction, some erosion going on. And there is some deer predation in this area. So I don't know if that's part of what's gone on here, but this was a new homeowner and they wanted to get something in this area. And so we are working on installing this one actually right now. But again, just bringing in more interest. I mean, this is a lot nicer to look at than just, moss is lovely, but this is more fun. And we do have a lot of deer tolerant things here. Again, here I've got knockout roses, invasive loriope along the edges there. And so just trying to bring in something else more interesting and native and create some more habitat. Boom. Understory trees, shrubs, lots of ground cover and perennials. So just taking inspiration from natural area, these are two near me, and bringing those into your space. So I've got a lot of blue stem grass and some goldenrod here in these communities. And, you know, this isn't necessarily how they're going to grow in the wild over on the right here, but it's a lot more interesting to us. So, you know, don't be afraid to use more of the flowers, and you're not necessarily trying to exactly create the same thing. But if you get the plants that want to grow together, and it's something that looks visually appealing to you, and hopefully it's bringing something for everybody. And same thing here. This is building dunes and a coastal landscape in the middle of gravel parking lot. We brought in trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials. And yeah, this was with Southern Branch Nursery, a local nursery who I believe is on this in the audience tonight. All right, so where can you get plants? I did want to include this because it's an important part of the equation. So certainly know what your regional Native Plant Society chapter is. And even on the state Native Plant Society site over on the right here, I've got a screenshot of all the nurseries they have listed there, native plant nurseries. And your local one may have even more information. And a lot of them have native plant sales. Prairie Nursery is a good resource online. They do offer retail native plants online. Isle Native Plants is kind of a collaboration of several different wholesale nurseries. And so they take all of those wholesale plants and then offer them at retail to the public. Mid-Atlantic Native Plant Farm and Wetland Plants Inc. are both also online, primarily do wholesale, but they do offer some retail sales as well. So yeah, find your local native plant nurseries and get to know them, especially. Use your regional native plant campaign. Use your plant guides. Those may also have some resources for what your native plant nurseries are and what your native plants are. And that's it. This is me. So please, you are welcome to contact me. It is a really busy time of year for landscapers. So I'll warn you, it may take me a minute, but I am happy for you to contact me, ask me questions. And I know these guys are going to take questions as well. So thank you all. Do I have to end this? Oops.
Thank you so much, Trista. Yeah. Let's see. I'll even make myself visible. Now, we do have some quite a long list of questions that we've been amassed. I'm sorry, I was busy trying to answer one as you finished your lovely presentation, Trista. Thank you for packing so much into the evening. And so I'm going to turn the question and answer session over to our compatriot Lisa, please, and let her bring some of these questions to you. We have approximately 25 minutes. And we'll get through just as many as we can. Thank you, Lisa.
Right. I was just trying to bring myself up and see if I can get to the questions. Well, I don't know if we'll get to all of the questions. There are quite a few questions. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
we do.
Great. One question, one of the very first questions that came up was someone wanted to know that they're trying to reclaim a marsh area with native grasses. They currently have loblolly pines and invasive grasses. Do you have any recommendations for them?
It depends on a lot of things. I deal with a lot of tidal marshes here in our area, and I'm not sure what invasive grasses they're dealing with. So I don't know, I can't really advise what the best way to manage those would be. I know down here Phragmites is really horribly invasive one that we deal with a lot. And unfortunately, one of the only ways to deal with it, and I hate to even say it, but is kind of a water safe herbicide, not Roundup, not Roundup, but it would have to be done by a professional and someone who knows what they're doing, because it's such a sensitive area to get into the wetlands. But you don't want to disturb the roots. You don't want to cause more erosion. And so it's tricky. You could try to repeatedly just cut it back. Again, depending on what that grass is, and try to exhaust the root system and try to exhaust the plant. And then, I mean, you probably want to get it knocked back before you get anything else planted in there. But I would suggest like a resource like Wetland Plants Inc. that I had on that slideshow. They're really great for getting plugs for wetland areas. Relatively inexpensively, and they include shipping in their costs. And so you could get a large number of plants in without breaking the bank and start getting some natives going in that area.
So they could give you recommendations for marshy areas.
Yeah, specifically that's what they do. And so and they may also have recommendations about how you could get rid of it, whatever it is, or maybe be able to ID it. But that would be an important thing to know before talking about how to get rid of it.
Okay. Well, going back, staying with the subject of grasses, someone else said that an expert told them that if they wanted to plant their natives to go, they would have to go back to grasses, because that was what the Piedmont was originally. And they also want to have a pollinator garden, but they're concerned because grasses will need to be burned every 3 to 5 years. Do you have any comments about that, or familiar to you?
I mean, so someone is saying that's what their local plant community is a grassland.
That's what their expert told them.
Mm-hmm.
That it was originally a grassland
mm-hmm.
in the Piedmont. And that they are concerned that they will have to burn the grasses. Are you familiar with this, having to burn the grasses?
It's not something we do here.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know that that's allowed in our city. So honestly, I'm not an expert on that. I would say there shouldn't be any reason why you can't also introduce more of like a grassland meadow. If you really wanted to bring in some other pollinator flowering things, I can't see any reason why that would be terrible.
This is just the Piedmont, so you must. There's a lot of resources available for that, right? The Native Plant Society has lots of resources for plant in the Piedmont.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And the regional plant guide probably as well would have some of those resources.
That's an interesting question.
All right, there's a lot of things that I just don't really deal with down here. I know people may also mention things like deer, and
how'd you know?
Say we actually don't have deer here, which is bizarre.
I was going to ask that question.
You're so lucky.
I'm going to get down to that deer question soon. One question, no.
Design. I will refer you.
Oh, that just takes care of the deer question now.
Yeah, I have had clients use the motion detector sprinklers in specific areas if they can't fence an area out because they are quick to startle. But otherwise, other than trying to use things that are more deer resistant, which is all relative because they're going to eat something. And if they run out of stuff they don't like, then they're going to eat the stuff that they don't like as much. So I do recommend that resource.
But someone got very specific because they wanted deer resistant items for the sun and for the shade. So would that book have that?
It does, yeah. And it also talks about just some different ways of organizing the garden and things that you can do aside from worrying about the plant palette even too, but it does organize the plants by levels of how delicious they are for the deer.
How delicious they are. It's the Yelp ratings.
Yes.
I do have a question, and I think there are several people might have asked. They were wondering what were some evergreen trees and shrubs you would recommend.
Okay, well, as far as the large trees, I did mention the live oak, though that is certainly a regional one for us. There are magnolias, and that goes with the understory too, sweet bay magnolia. The shrubs that I really like are wax myrtle here, and the inkberry. And I mean, any of the hollies are going to be evergreen. We've got cedars. I think those are a lot of my evergreen palette here as far as the tree and shrub layer, I think.
I love the wax myrtle. I love the smell
Yeah.
of wax myrtle.
Yeah, wax myrtle's got a great smell, and it's really pretty versatile too. In addition to so is the inkberry. So yeah, they're both really nice to use for screening or just to provide that something evergreen in the landscape.
Another question. Well, there were several questions. You spoke about serviceberries.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I adore serviceberries, and I think their fruit tastes so delicious when they don't have apple or when they don't have cedar rust.
Yes.
Several people asked that. Is it still valuable? Is it, they said their serviceberry is getting cedar rust or apple rust. Is it still valuable when it gets the rust? Is it going to come back every year? Are they going to have rust every year? And do you have a preferred, well, I'll ask this question after you're done. We'll talk about the rust right now.
Yeah.
Suggestions about the cedar rust.
The cedar rust is a pain. I also have it. And because I have mine planted really close proximity to cedars, which I didn't recognize at the time that I did it. But I have found at least that anecdotally, I still get some of the berries myself. All of them still seem to disappear, except for, sometimes some of them get really kind of mutilated and they leave those alone. But I think there's still enough of them. And I mean, the flowers are still providing something to the pollinators, and they are still providing to some of those host insects. So I think certainly it's still valuable and it's still pretty. I have had someone try, and they haven't gotten back to me yet. I don't know if using something like what you might use on apples, can use
Copper spray?
Clay spray.
Copper spray?
Maybe, but there's a clay spray. So it's totally inert, and you spray it on, and I mean, you have to reapply it whenever it rains. But something like that may also help to kind of keep it down. It's going to look a little silvery, but it might be something to try if it really bothers you. If it gets really bad on the limbs and things, sometimes I'll cut out those pieces and parts, but it will continue to come back as long as you've got the cedars around.
Another question was, do you have a preferred species or cultivar of the serviceberry?
I just use the species on that one.
Straight species.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question about trees. What do you recommend as some fast-growing native trees?
Aside from the river birch.
River birch?
Yeah. Which I mentioned. If you have room for it, tulip poplar. That's a fast-growing one, and that's the tallest native tree in Virginia. So that'll certainly get you some height. Let's see, fast-growing pines. are pretty fast growing. A lot of the fast growing trees tend to be more short lived. Some of the understory trees grow relatively quickly too, things like redbud. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to get some quicker coverage, sometimes some smaller things or, large shrubs may be a better way to go, because it's all relative with trees. It's still going to take them a few years to get to the size that you want potentially. But I mean, even if they're in the right conditions, I mean, we planted a white oak out front, which is a relatively slow growing thing, and in 4 years it's doubled its size from 10 to 20 feet. So I mean, it's all relative. And
would you say an elm or a red maple would be a good
yeah
tree? Hazelnut?
Fast growing. We don't do red maple here because they get gloomy scale as the climate kind of shifts and the zones shift. It's getting too warm for them here, but they are fast growing. Which other one?
American hazelnut was suggested.
Okay.
I
don't know as much about that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next question. Oh, here's the deer question.
Oh.
Let me see. You've already answered that. I think that book sounds like a great read.
Sorry, we're a freak city, so I don't know.
Let's see. Oh, now you spoke quite a bit about mountain laurels. So we've got some problems here. I have, someone said they have several mountain laurel bushes that haven't bloomed in 2 years. How do you make them bloom? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I don't know if their conditions have changed. If they've had trees maybe shade them out a little more, or I wouldn't guess that the pH of their soil had changed.
Would you say they're difficult to grow?
They can be. They can be pretty particular about where they want to be, certainly.
One person, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One person asked if they were difficult to grow and said that, and they had one and it died, and someone told them they just don't grow in Leesburg. I mean, is this true?
People say they don't grow in Virginia Beach because we're coastal and it's a mountain laurel, and they grow here, but they just grow in very specific spots here. And I think
I've seen them in Leesburg when they're wild.
Yeah. And I see them on the banks of our rivers, and they're growing wild there. And yeah, I think if they have the right spot, then they're happy. And the happiest ones I see are the ones that are growing naturally.
Yeah.
I planted a few in different places around my yard, and one of them took and the rest did not. So they certainly can be picky, and need really the right conditions. But yeah, I mean, if you have them and they're happy, then they're gorgeous. And they're a great shrub, but they're evergreen. And
by the way, are they poisonous?
No. Oh, to eat or
yeah,
or generally? No. Yeah.
I mean, for animals, for dogs, for instance.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things you wouldn't really want your dog to eat.
Yeah, well, I think most anything is poisonous to some degree.
Yeah.
So it's not cabbage.
It's not one that they should eat. Just like, I mean, milkweeds, some people get weirded out about those because they are certainly toxic. So if you have an animal that just likes to munch on the foliage, then there are a lot of things you probably don't want to have around, and mountain laurel would be one. And yeah, milkweed would also definitely be one.
Okay, milkweed, mountain laurel. Someone wants to know, what city are you located in, by the way?
Virginia Beach.
Virginia Beach, that's right. Okay. Let's see. Oh, let me move on to another topic that you addressed quite a bit. We had a lot of questions about ground covers.
Uh-huh.
So one question is, what strategy do you do? What is the best strategy for removing turf to replace it with ground covers? And
Depends on how much time you have, depends on what season it is. The easiest, fastest thing is just to get a sod remover, sod cutter, and take it up. It's not necessarily going to get 100%, especially if you have something like Bermuda grass, but that'll do it. If you have more time, you can certainly always smother. And so smothering would be with several layers of newspaper or cardboard, and you put it down and put several inches of mulch on top of that. And that the heat and the not allowing the sunlight to get to the area will help to, oh goodness, I have a visitor, sorry. My 3-year-old's going to bed. So something like that would be a good idea for a space like that. Where you have, all right, sweetheart.
night night.
Night night, sweetie.
Good night, everyone.
Night night.
And so if you have the time and it's the right season, then the summer is a really good time to do solarization. And the difference between solarization and smothering is with smothering, you've got typically either that mulch, or you could use like a black tarp or something. With solarization, you're putting down clear plastic over an area, securing it. And that is really good, especially if you have a lot of weed seeds, or if you do have a really persistent grass, like a warm season grass like Bermuda, because that's really going to get down into the soil and cook it basically. And so that's going to take out your weed seeds. It will kill them, and it will also kill the root systems. And it will also kill the beneficial organisms within the soil in that area, but they have found in studies that it does come back very quickly. So usually people ask about that. So solarization is great if you have something that's really persistent, and you have the time to put that down for 4 to 6 weeks in the summer, in the heat of the summer. But otherwise, the smothering is a good way. And that's going to help to kind of start creating some good soil and compost there too, as that breaks down.
I can vouch for that. I've done that, and I got great soil from that.
Yeah.
What are some native replacements for turf grass that can be walked on or played on?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's
Those Nomo sedge grasses are probably about the closest you're gonna get as far as something that really can tolerate traffic. Still probably not going to be as much traffic as turf grass can handle. So really, if you have an area that's just going to constantly be trafficked, then maybe just a path or keeping some turf in that area could be ideal. But yeah, if it's not constantly trafficked, then one of the sedges, and again, there's a million of them that they're producing now commercially that are native. And so finding one of those that's the right one for your site. And I mean, there's also native Nomo seed blends and things like that you can look into, but I think those are a good option.
Can you plant ground covers in a pollinator garden in order to avoid using mulch?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely do that.
And will they choke out plants around them though? That's one of the questions.
Not typically, and especially if you are using those plant communities as guides, because ideally, again, it's going to be plants that have evolved to kind of grow together. And so typically, unless it's a really, really super aggressive ground cover and you've got a really dainty thing popping up, they're generally going to come right up through that ground cover. And again, especially if they're intended to grow with that plant. So if you're using your plant communities, you should really have no problem, because they hopefully will not be out competing each other. But yeah, I would absolutely, I do use ground cover in all my beds, and I don't think any of my perennials have been smothered out.
Okay. We do have a couple of questions about ground covers and using them on any recommendations for slopes and for controlling erosion. And in full sun also.
Yeah, of course. A specific one, it depends on where you're at. A lot of them, what you're looking for with a ground cover to help prevent erosion typically is one that's going to be sending up, it's like a spreading clumper, because then it's going to have that root system that's going to help hold the soil in place. I don't use a whole lot of ground covers for that. If it's a really serious erosion issue, I tend to use more shrubs, because they hold the soil better a lot of times.
Yeah.
Because of that really solid root system. But I could use something like a Lynnhaven carpet flower, Erigerum pucellus, another sun one, maybe the Penstemon digitalis, which depending on where you are, it's got kind of an evergreen foliage. Pussy toes, maybe, if it's a really hot, dry area.
These could also be used. I mean, there were several people who want to replace their lawn, and they will take over the lawn. These could also be used to replace the lawn as well. Would you say?
Yeah.
Pussy toes, etc.
With a hot, dry area, yeah.
Okay, with a hot and dry area.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have, they flower at one time of year, so for a little bit you're gonna have flowers popping up, but most of the time they're just that basal foliage down on the ground, so that could be effective.
All right, we have, I think we've addressed most of the questions. There is, I hope we've addressed them. There's one question about recommendations for planting plants for containers.
Oh, I don't do a lot of containers, but when I do though, I do also use layers. It makes them more interesting. So, they usually say you've got, let's see if I can even get it right. It's like the 3 layers. So you've got something kind of creeping over the bottom, which would be kind of like your ground cover, and you've got that coverage at the bottom. And then usually something kind of in the middle layer of that, something kind of medium, short and flowering, and then a taller thing in the center, which I tend to use grasses for the center of a container area. So you can still kind of bring those layers in. There are some smaller compact shrubs maybe that you could even get into a container, depending on the size of the container. I mean, obviously some containers are large enough for a small tree. So it all depends on your container, but I would still bring those layers in. You're going to have different interest, bring in some different seasonal interest as well. But you could definitely layer up a container.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
A lot of really good information. Thank you. Joanne? I think it's her.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. Indeed. Trista, you have been very gracious and very generous in the time that you've given us. And we're so delighted that you would be able to share your gifts with us. This is all the time we have for this evening, but I hope you will remember and join in again for our next session on Tuesday evening, the 6th of April at 6:15 or 6:30. Our speaker then will be Celia Bucolo with the Piedmont Environmental Council. And Celia will tell us how to provide pollinator habitat and support Virginia's smallest residents by making your yard seem like a national park for insects. So do join us again. Thank you all for your attention, for your patience. We certainly didn't get to every question but there will be some effort, if we can, to respond to some of them in the weeks ahead as we're able. And of course, if you continue with our series, you'll have another opportunity to address some of the questions as appropriate. So again, Trista, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to all, and especially Lisa and those behind the scenes who are managing tonight. Good night, and thanks for planting Virginia natives.